Hello grade 10s, as you already know, owner's equity decreases on the debit side and increases on the credit side. Okay, now there's different forms of owner's equity and I'm going to look at two of them now. The one is an income and the one would be an expense. Okay. Alright, so there's different forms of income. Let's say we take example of rent income as a form of an income. Now normally the rule states that owner's equity becomes more on the credit side and less on the debit side. Okay, but let's say we look at income as a specific account like rent income, and we say that there is rent income of say 500 Rand. I'm just going to work with figures to get through a principle. Okay, so if I want the rent income to increase, okay, I can put it on the same side because I need to increase this value. So let's say I increase the rent income with 300 Rand. There's 300 Rand more rent income in the month. If I add the two together, I will get to say 800 Rand. Okay. Let's say I want to decrease this rent income. Okay. So in essence, the rent income increases on the credit side, as is with owner's equity increasing on the credit side. Okay. But now I want to decrease the rent income. I overstated the rent income and the rent income should be 200 Rand less. What I do now, I put 200 Rand on the debit side because I must put it on the other side, because on this side I'm increasing the same side, the normal side, the plus side, or the normal side where rent income will be put from the start, and that's the credit side. Now, if I want to decrease this, I must put it on the debit side. So if I do the balancing like I'm normally doing for any account, this side, credit side, is the biggest, 800 Rand. And then I put the 800 Rand on the debit side as well. And then the balance would be 600, which I bring down to the credit side. And in essence, I decrease the 800 Rand by 200 Rand, and I only have 600 Rand. So that is how I decrease the rent income. So on the same side, or the credit side, where rent income will normally be put down, because the rule states that owner's equity becomes more on the credit side. So incomes will normally be on the credit side. But if I have to decrease the income, I have to write a transaction on the debit side, and then it will minimize the rent income. Now, the problem is with expenses, because the rule states that owner's equity decreases on the debit side. Okay, so let's say I've got expenses, let's say I've got rent expense. Okay, it's just the opposite. I've got rent expense. Okay, so I've got rent expense of 500 Rand for the month. Okay, so expenses, to increase these expenses, to have more rent expense, okay, I have to put it on the same side. Okay, so if I add the two together, I've got 700 Rand rent expense. Okay, but now the confusion is because owner's equity decreases on the debit side. So now you would say, okay, but how can this increase on this side? The principle is just anything on the same side of any T account, you increase on that side, and if you want to minimize it, you put something on the other side. Okay, so expenses increases on the debit side because there's more expenses on this side. To decrease the expenses, I must put something on the other side, which in this case is the credit side. So I put 300 Rand here. Which side is the biggest? The debit side. I add 700 Rand and I put 700 Rand on that side as well, and then the balance left over is 400 Rand. Okay, so I minimized the 700 Rand expenses by 300 Rand, and now my expenses is only, beginning of the next month, is only the 400 Rand. Alright, so the 400 Rand is what is left. Okay, so don't become confused. The principle still for owner's equity is expenses is normally on the debit side, incomes are normally on the credit side. But if you want to minimize any account, you have to put it on the opposite side. So let's say income again, income normally on the credit side, so I increase it on the same side. If I want to decrease it, I put an amount on the other side, which is the debit side. Expenses normally has a debit balance, okay, according to the owner's equity rule. So I increase on the same side, and if I want to decrease the expenses, I will have to put something amount on the other side. Alright, so it's just a principle. You'll see when we do a couple of examples going forward.